Conversations across time, 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 across time, conversations 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 across time.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time, the program that allows us to have conversations with interesting personalities from different time frames. Tonight, we are joined once again by former Pennsylvania State Representative and my dear friend and co-host, Babette Josephs. Welcome, Babette.
My pleasure.
And seated next to Representative Josephs is former Secretary of State, Mr. John Foster Dulles.
Good evening.
Seated next to Secretary Dulles is Signor Niccolo Machiavelli. Welcome.
Thank you.
And of course, seated at my far right is the 35th President of the United States, and perhaps someone that you, the audience, might not know a lot about, and that is President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Welcome, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Now, we had a conversation recently, and during that conversation, we were actually asking Mr. Dulles for his understanding of perhaps what led him to be involved in Middle Eastern politics to the extent that there was an overthrow, there was a coup of the democratically elected president of Iran, and that would be Mr. Mossadegh. So I did ask when we last parted, and Mr. Dulles, I hope you've had a week to think about this. Do you have, looking at the political situation that exists in Iran today, do you have any regrets in terms of what might have happened had you and your brother not engineered a coup that overthrew the Iranian president?
My only regret, Ms. Crawford, is that we did not support more fully a regime that was on our side, that was an ally, that is, the regime of the Shah. If we had stood behind the Shah and his ministers, the situation, the upheavals during that time in 1979, I believe, would have cooled down when the mobs in Tehran accepted the fact that the Shah was there to stay, and we would make sure he stayed there.
Now let's give. I want to do a little background for perhaps some of our viewers that did not hear the first part of this conversation, and that is that Iran had a democratically elected president, and one of the things that President Mossadegh did when he came into power was to nationalize the oil reserves of Iran. Now, at the time that Mr. Mossadegh did this, the Iranian people were living in sheer poverty. There was an elite class, but primarily the people of Iran lived in shanty towns. They were starving. And so when Mr. Mossadegh comes along and says, well, we're going to nationalize the oil reserves of Iran and throws British petroleum out, why would that be a problem?
Because Mr. Mossadegh appealed to lower class prejudices and ignorance,
Right.
and overthrew an elite class which was running the government and the country perfectly well.
Running the government into the ground, running the country into the ground.
Well, the people were starving. I mean, they got
They've
tired
been
of it.
starving for centuries. Representative
So
Joseph.
they should be used to it now. You're right.
In a sense,
exactly.
yes. That
Why
poverty-
give them
that
potatoes if they can have
lifestyle has been
stones?
going on for centuries, and it will continue.
And it's good enough for them, right?
I think that we're all making a few distortions right now. The fact is that that entire region of the world has a particular set of environmental characteristics that make it not consistent with the Western ideal of stable agriculture that the U.S. has chosen as the core of its food source.
I would argue with you that
You would argue that the Middle East is
the Fertile Crescent.
part of it is the Fertile Crescent, but that is an area that exists primarily between two rivers, which in more recent centuries have begun to dry up.
And Egypt is a huge source of wheat and all kinds of grains.
I don't deny that
There's agriculture.
I don't deny the pardon me. I do not deny the
The
existence of
president
agriculture.
wants to speak.
And the president always speaks last. I do not deny the existence of agriculture. All I'm suggesting is that it's a bit of a distortion to suggest that what we in this particular set of geographical circumstances now in the United States, what we would consider to be poverty is not poverty to people who have
are
a
used
legacy
to
of,
it, right.
I'm not talking about whether they're accustomed to it. I'm talking about a specific culture, which is small-scale pastoral farming, and the majority of it is animal herding.
They hated the Shah. They hated
That
him.
has nothing to do with
And now they hate us. It has to do with us.
It doesn't matter whether they hate us or not.
Of course it matters.
Our interests lie in a stable, supportive government,
If you'll
and
permit
that
me,
is, yes, senor.
Why does it matter who hates whoever this us is that you're referring
The
to?
United States. The country.
How is that
All of us.
relevant to how is the esteem in which the rest of the world holds the United States relevant to what the United States does and has to do? Honestly, how does that affect the United States?
Well, I think it makes it almost impossible for us to protect our own interests because we are looked upon by the rest of the world as evil, as an enemy, as a bully, as a boss, as a country they want to avoid at all costs.
As are all powerful nations throughout history.
Well, see, Senor Machiavelli, what I want to throw something in, and that is, in your treatise, which I am of the position that the Dulles brothers follow as a handbook, you state that it's more practical, it's more important for a prince to be practical than to be morally good. Now, given that, your position has to do more with the prince maintaining power, so that power becomes his ultimate reward.
Neck.
And his neck.
Yes.
Now, I just look at it, and I had the question about how that information and that way of thinking is applied to the situation in the Middle East as it exists today. I tend to think, and President Eisenhower, I'd like to hear from you, if you believe that in fact what happened in Iran in 1953 has possibly led us to where we are today with the Middle East conflict, with the idea that Iran might become nuclear.
Well, number one, the Middle East is composed of many, many, many different factions.
Yes.
And factions. And they don't talk to each other, so why should they talk to us? They're all looking for the same thing, money and power. It doesn't matter who's in office, the population automatically hates them. And you're going to see overthrow after overthrow after overthrow. They can't get their act together any more
Then we can get ours together.
And he wrote the book on it.
The Middle East is not all that different from how the entire rest of the Mediterranean was a few thousand years ago.
That's true.
There's a culture of pastoral herding. There's a culture of small-scale farming.
And little nation states
and
tribes.
small warring nation states.
And
the only difference now is the scale of the weaponry.
That is a big
Well, it's a big
difference.
difference.
It's a big
It's a
difference.
big difference.
It's a big difference in terms of what is actually possible regarding
Yeah.
destruction, but it creates no difference at all in the actual culture of the people. That's why.
Oh, I don't think that's true.
There can be. You're suggesting that somehow through the statements that you've made in this beginning part of this conversation and in the previous one, you're suggesting that somehow the United States has a moral authority that could displace the culture that has existed in the Middle East.
No.
That's the suggestion. That's not.
We could be a leader instead of a whipping boy.
No question, that's not correct.
Who could be a leader instead of a
The
whipping boy?
country.
We have a problem leading ourselves, let alone the rest of the world.
Heavens
And
knows, yes.
The situation is that it's going to continue. Nothing that we do or say as a government today will change anything in the world, because they all have their own set of values, they have their own idioms, and they have their own ideologies, and they don't only believe what they want to believe.
If you believe that, then why, well, you
'Cause
didn't
you
want to
wanna
be
stay alive.
president, but
That's
why
what it
be
is.
president?
Well, because somebody has to be president, and I didn't choose to be.
Right.
I was chosen. And believe me, it was the worst job I ever had, next to being the commanding general of Europe, because the supreme commander, because in that job, much like the same job, I was sending people to their death. And I didn't enjoy that for 1 minute.
But when you were the commander, people probably weren't working behind your back and around you, as you described in an earlier conversation.
Someone's always working behind a general.
You had to go no further than General Alexander Montgomery, and ultimately Churchill.
Yes.
Those are the people who are our allies who were working against me. They handicapped me in every way possible.
But they were not within your chain of command.
Excuse me. Yes, they were, because we were defending them as well as ourselves. We didn't belong in England except for them, not for ourselves.
I understand, but as
we
the
were
supreme
afraid we'd
commander
be next.
of the Allied forces, it just seems to me that it was somewhat different to have the Dulles brothers working behind your back than to have someone who was in the military chain of command under you working behind your back. I think that these guys were just, in fact, one of the things that bothers me is that Mr. Dulles, your brother, became friends with a British agent who was actually a double agent and turned over information of the entire machinations of the CIA in Europe.
There's never been a war without double agents, and there's never been a government without people operating in its shadows.
But we lost 1,000. We lost 1,000.
When Quisling did that.
It's only a question of degree. That's number one.
Yes.
But number two is that you have to understand that when we went into Europe, my worst enemy at that time, believe it or not, was General Patton.
Yes.
Now, we were classmates and we were good friends, except he was uncontrollable. He didn't take directions or instructions or orders. He became his own supreme commander, until finally I took away the one thing that he couldn't get for himself: gasoline and oil. That's why we stopped him. He was going to go right into Berlin, and I had made a deal with the Russians that they could be first.
Now,
don't ask me why.
Now, Mr. President, I want you to, when we come back from break, I want you to talk about that, because I somehow think that for whatever reason that General Patton may have been his own person and he had his own ideas, he certainly was not empowered to the extent that your Secretary of State was empowered, and could not make policy decisions. So we'll come back. We'll take a break. I know you're burning to answer this question, and so when we come back from break, I would love to hear what you have to say. And so we will be back right after this break. Thank you.
Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time.
Are you accusing me of taking advantage?
I'm accusing you of raping her. Repeatedly. That's what I'm accusing you of. She had no way to say no.
Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across.
Waiting for a bus on a street corner when my friend Vivian drives by in a car and says, Babette, I want you. I need you. So I thought, sure. And I had a card with me, my business card. I gave it to her and I thought, I probably won't hear from Vivian again for a while, but right away she emailed me, she called me, and now I'm doing her concept, which is really, really interesting to make history alive and to relate it to what's happening now in our country and our world. And Vivian dragged me into it. I can't say I really resisted too hard. And that's what I'm...
Now, Mr. President, when we took the break, I presented you with a question regarding the damage that was done by the Dulles brothers, and you were burning to give me an answer, so please respond.
Well, first of all, the blame, at least in the very beginning, was Alan Dulles. He became friendly while he was in London with Kim Philby, who...
Ken Philby?
Yes, the Russian double agent. And he befriended him to the point that he invited him to his home and became his friend in the States and kept pushing him internally to the CIA. And he was giving us some information, most of which we had already had. And in return, Alan Dulles was giving him the names of the agents in place around the world. And he was
our agents,
our agents,
our
yes,
employees.
Our agents. And we had thousands of them at the time. Because it was ordinary people in some cases, just giving us bits and pieces that we were able to meld together and make a decision. And what he did was, we gave him time, place, phone numbers, addresses, identities, and he passed it right straight through to the Russians. And the Russians rolled them over.
Killed them.
They took them all, killed them. And it set the CIA in this country back 100 years.
Now, Senor Machiavelli seems to think that
that's
there was
evil.
no problem with that because there are always double agents in conflict.
That's another distortion. I never said there was no problem with it. What I said is that it's not surprising.
No, it's not
I'm
surprising.
sorry.
The fact is that in any conflict, there are costs. Some of those costs are in people, some of those costs are physical production, weapons. There's always costs. So it's unfortunate
It's
that the
reprehensible.
costs were so large,
Reprehensible is the word.
but they're to be expected. Reprehensible is language of morality, which has no
There you
place in
go.
a discussion of statehood.
Well, and we have to understand,
No, I'm not sure I agree with that, and I think that's what this discussion is about.
and we don't agree. That's the whole point. We don't agree. While we've
Well,
read your, no, wait a minute, let me finish. While we've read your treatise and we understand what it says, we recognize that people like Secretary Dulles and his brother read your treatise and used it as a handbook. for running this country.
That's what you're making a false equivalence. What you're saying is that the choices that the Dulles brothers made were based on a short work that is essentially a manual of statesmanship, where in reality they made their choices to satisfy their own ends. They just used the book as a manual to accomplish their own goals.
We agree.
Those two things are not the same.
Senor Machiavelli, I'm here to tell you, and I want to say this and have you understand, because we're talking about the ramifications of acts, and I want you to know that your little treatise, as you refer to it, has been used since it was written by people like Mr. Dulles, Secretary Dulles, and his brother, and I mean, you look at it and it's sort of like a blueprint that is followed by all people who want to acquire power. And you're worshipped today, Mr. Machiavelli.
That is false. First off,
Senor Machiavelli, you are worshipped by people like John Foster Dulles.
Jesus Christ is worshipped by people who distort his teachings. I'm certainly nowhere near on the moral high ground with which we associate with our Lord and Savior. However, that does not make our Lord and Savior responsible for the cruel acts that people have chosen to perpetrate in his name.
It is what you could be called common sense, the way that power has been exercised from time immemorial. And whoever challenges the strength and the power of the prince, as Senor Machiavelli would put it, is inevitably put down, or else the challenger becomes the prince.
I would argue that there have been more lives saved by people who were using the principles that I wrote about than there have been lives lost, because the principles that I wrote about, Madam, please allow me to finish. The principles that I wrote about are principles of expediency and ways to get things done quickly and efficiently. Of course, at times, lives must be taken, but the best way to save lives is by taking the smallest number in the shortest time.
And that's why we dropped 2 atomic bombs to save people's lives.
Those were all yellow people, so they weren't
important. That's right.
We didn't have atomic bombs until they were invented. If the atomic bombs had existed earlier, they would have been used earlier, just as gunpowder didn't exist before. Nations rose and fell at the point of a spear.
You heard President Eisenhower say that he had regrets of sending people off to their deaths, that he knew.
One always regrets sending people to die.
You and Secretary Dulles seem to have no such problems. Right. You have no such issues. President Eisenhower,
I just want to say one thing, Senor, that you're entitled to your own wrong opinion.
I appreciate
But that's about it, because through the test of time, there's no question that people have used your treatise as the Bible for political gain.
We can all agree that that's a misuse.
Question.
Fine, but they have.
We have to put it. The problem we have is that everybody in this room can't control what everybody in that room does. And that's an ongoing thing which will never change, and unfortunate for the real world.
But in this country, I think we adopted a premise, or at least that's what I was taught in school, that what they're doing in the other room is not our business necessarily, number one. And number two, there's no reason why the people in the other room shouldn't come up with a product or a process that is just as good, maybe better than what we're doing in this room. And you have to believe in a democratic process. You have to believe, I think, that the means are more important than the ends. I don't believe that there are any ends, actually. I believe it's all means.
I think you're living in a dream world.
I believe it's
all process.
I believe that is
only process counts.
I believe that is a very idealistic.
That's what lawyers think.
I believe that's a very idealistic concept, representative, and that
lawyers
bears nothing.
In process.
And that bears nothing. The force of the superior over the inferior is the process. It is the law. That is the law
Well, if you have a
time
bigger
immemorial.
gun
That's
than
the
I
law of
have,
nature.
you'll boss me around.
That's the law of nature.
The
Absolutely.
laws, I don't
Animal
think that's
kingdoms
true.
and
Don't get
cavemen.
into animals with me. I mean, animals kill when they're hungry. We kill when we're bored.
There are plenty
That's
of
very good,
animals
by the
who
way. I
kill
like
for their
that.
own entertainment.
Can I use that?
Yes,
And as for
certainly.
the 1,000 agents who allegedly lost their lives, that has gone on also in time immemorial.
Yeah,
in
and it's
war,
always-
that some
Yeah, the
you
last
can't-
one who did it was Rove. Karl Rove tried
You-
to.
Oh, yes,
You
let's
can't-
talk about, no, this is interesting. Because Karl Rove did the self-same thing.
Only there
And
was only one agent
There was one
that we
agent.
know of.
And of course, we, the public was alarmed by this. Now, so it sounds
Repulsed.
to me
I'd
like.
say
you can't
repulsed.
win a chess game without losing some pawns.
Oh
That's what these
my.
agents were, pawns.
And those 1,000 agents were pawns?
They
And
were
how about
they
the rest
served
of
a
us?
function for the United States government.
How about the rest of us? All citizens are
Your
pawns?
brother should have been tried. Your brother should have been tried. He should have been brought up on criminal charges.
He should have been shot, as Eisenhower said.
That is how the functions of that is the function of government. That is how governments are run. That is how states are run.
Did he make a mistake? Do you think it was wrong for him to disclose the identities of those 1,000 agents?
I
to
don't
a
know
Russian
what
agent?
I don't know what Alan was thinking at the time, and I believe that Alan's judgments have always been for the benefit of the United States and its government.
Your question supposes that Dulles knew that the information he was conveying was being used.
He could have figured it out. Come on.
Those of
Mr.
us who were
President.
not present at the time.
I don't think so. I believe that Allen Dulles, in his infinite wisdom, had the interest of the United States at heart. However, he committed murder,
Yes.
and that's
And
a crime.
treason.
And that's what the problem is. You don't have to go any further than look at the State Wilson, who went to
Right.
Africa to see about atom bombs or the makers of atom bombs, and Valerie, his wife, who the government gave up, and she could have been killed
Exactly.
by the
Because
way,
Rove,
just as an
Karl
aside,
Rove.
she was our neighbor.
really?
Yeah, she went to school with my son.
Huh.
And I will tell you that's you can strike that if you want. The problem we have in this country is that we've lost our way. And it's a problem that started with me, and I admit it. I was a pawn in the hands of the
I don't
Dulles
think it
brothers.
started
There's
with
no
you.
question, because I wasn't well enough to function on a daily basis. And I permitted John to do a lot of the functioning for me and make decisions for me. And that was wrong as we look across time. At the time, though, I was quite ill. And I couldn't think clearly. I was having terrible, terrible, terrible pains. My doctors could not help me. I had a doctor with me 24/7, Dr. Snyder, and it was something that unfortunately was part of my makeup. And because of that, this country suffered.
And President Eisenhower, and because of course, as always, we get to interesting topics and we're just about out of time. But one of the things that I appreciate is that you admit that you made mistakes in entrusting so much of your foreign policy
To evil people.
yes,
Well,
to
you know-
Secretary
Evil,
Dulles and
evil
to
is
his
a
brother.
relative term, Ms.
But-
Crawford.
But you, Secretary Dulles, I have to say, it troubles me that you seem to have no regrets. We're looking at the Middle East as the source of world problems today, and here we are, left with you have no regrets. And with that, we will have to say goodnight and thank you for joining us for Conversations Across Time, where we have interesting conversations with people who have made and shaped the way we live today. Thank you very much. I'm Vivian Crawford. Good night.
Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time. conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.